Is this election going to be swayed by the independents?
Aren't all elections?
Well, you might be right. In March of this year, Ron Case was endorsed by Senate District 42 as its DFL candidate for state senate. Ron is a 30-plus resident of Eden Prairie, has taught in the Eden Prairie Public Schools for 31 years, and is a 4-term council member on the Eden Prairie City Council. Welcome back, Ron.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, Ron, now that you're endorsed, how are you going to win this election? Your opponent, David Hahn, is a quite conservative, wannabe governor, now is back running for as an incumbent for the state senate. Do you think that the electorate is ready to turn him out of office and elect you?
I think that's yet to be seen. I guess I would answer, I hope so. I'm going to run trying to be myself and trying to let people get to know me as best I can. I've run 4 different winning campaigns over the years. I think the people of Eden Prairie know who I am, and my task is to have the people of Minnetonka find out who I am. Mm-hmm. I hope they find out that I'm much more balanced and much more what I hope to be middle of the road perceived, that I believe that's where most people living in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka fall.
Is this election going to be swayed by the independents?
Aren't all elections?
Well, you might be right.
I would say yeah. I think if the election were held tomorrow, one could argue that both of David Hahn and I might receive somewhere in the 40s, and that we're going to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time this year to get about 5 or 6% of the vote to be swayed one way or the other.
So what's going to influence those independent voters? What do you think?
Well, I think both David Hahn and I agree, and I think most of the people out there agree, that we have some major problems facing Minnesota today, and really facing people at all levels of government. And I think ultimately people aren't necessarily maybe looking for the right exact solution, because I think they're probably tired of people promising solutions that never come true. What I'm hoping people want to hear is that we're going to need people to talk from both parties to each other, and really possibly look outside the box to figure out how to solve some of these major problems. We have what's approaching a $6 billion deficit in the state of Minnesota over the next 2 to 3 years. And most people on really both sides of the aisle will say that you can't solve that simply by cutting taxes or cutting programming. You can't solve it by raising taxes, and you can't solve it by bonding alone. It's going to take some solution of the 3, and that's going to take a lot of problem solving and consensus building.
But what do you do when the Republicans refuse to go along? Nationally, 100% opposition to health care. In Minnesota, 100% opposition to overriding the governor's veto of the GAMC. What are you hearing from them, the citizens of Eden Prairie and Minnetonka? What are their base concerns at the present time?
I think it's primarily the inactivity of government, or its inability to go out and solve problems, and some of the partisanship I think that you referred to.
Is this a frustration on their part?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know that a lot of us, me included, understand the dynamics of why it has to be like that. We always idealize that if we were in there, we would talk to each other, we would actually try to problem solve and make things work, but parties are very strong. Parties help people get reelected. Parties control often the way an individual may want to vote or has to vote. So I think it's much more complicated than just let's get along, but there's still that urge, that inclination for people to say, why can't we just get along and get something done?
I want to focus in on one issue that I think might be sort of unique to someone with your background as an educator, and that is the current brouhaha that's going on between the governor and what I would call Education Minnesota, the teachers' unions, relative to the fact that Minnesota was unsuccessful in its application for substantial federal grants related to education. Have you been following that issue?
I have, the Race to the Top program.
Yeah. What's your take on it? In general, do you think one side is more to blame than the other?
I think that's part of the problem, is everyone's looking for who to blame. I don't think that's necessarily the way to handle it. But I don't think either side, but particularly the governor, reached out to the Education Minnesota people and to sit down and really pull them in as partners. that may be arguable to some people, but I do think there's no way to, again, solve some of the problems of education, which also stems back to funding, without partnering. And I think Education Minnesota is a fantastic organization. I think there's a tad bit of union bashing going on out there, and I think it's easy to
maybe more than a tad.
It's easy to look at a surface issue on just licensing, or looking at the Teach for America program, which has a whole lot of college graduates that go out into inner city schools, and a lot because of their energy.
But without benefit of a teaching degree.
Correct. And I think on some level, I think they do a decent job because of their energy. I think there are probably reasons why many of them don't stay in the field. And we have all of our licensing requirements across the state of Minnesota for electricians and plumbers. So to think that we would even consider not keeping a pretty tight licensing requirement for teachers, I think is unheard of. But not to say we can't pull in the Teach for America students and maybe figure out how to license them in some new, novel way. I think Education Minnesota probably needs to sit down at the table and be part of that conversation. Well,
Ron, when you're elected, maybe you can take on that issue as well as many others. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Democratic Visions is handmade by volunteers for DFL Senate District 42. Visit our website or call NORB to connect with us.